Hey there, everyone. So, we're going to talk today about suicide awareness and intervention and what that looks like, um, kind of from the perspective of compassionately and collaboratively doing this with a client. Okay. So, some of what we talk about might be new information for you, and some might be things that you have a pretty good sense of already. What I would say is because this is a bit longer, I really encourage you to take breaks throughout, pause, get what you need to have around you as you move through this training. Um, Talking about suicide can be really difficult. For many, it can even be potentially triggering. And I want to acknowledge that there may be folks consuming and engaging with this material who have had thoughts of suicide or maybe at some level currently. So, if that's the case, especially currently, I really encourage you to reach out to people in your life that support you. And you can always reach out to me if there are further areas of exploration around this material. So, really, what we're looking to do today is understand the steps in recognizing that suicide might be in the room and being able to ask about it directly. Understand the importance of, I said patient, that should be client, listening to the client's story of suicide, and just really increasing our level of confidence in asking the question, because often this is really where a lot of our own anxieties come up. And this is really kind of the undercurrent of why we're doing this, because from a community care standpoint, we're concerned about the safety of our friends, family members, clients, fellow humans. And we want to be alert to the risk of suicide and be able to respond quickly. And it's really everyone's business. So even if you were not in a graduate program for counseling, where yes, this is some of the stuff that we discuss with clients in our rooms together. Um, but suicide awareness is one of those things that we want to pass on. We want to have these things out in the open in our communities so we can talk about them more openly, reduce that stigma that is often associated with suicide, and increase people's ability to be supportive and active listeners and feel like they can be alert helpers. These are just a couple of quotes that I like that have been taken from an article, a 2004 article called The Delicate Art of Eliciting Suicide Ideation. Suicide assessment has much in common with assembling a jigsaw puzzle. The risk factors and unique suicidal thoughts and plans represent two big bags of puzzle pieces. And suicide is preventable. Most people desperately want to live. They're just unable to see alternatives in this situation and the problems. They give definite warning signals of their intentions, but others are often not educated about what to look for, unaware of the significance, and unsure about what to do with them. So that's what we're hoping to try and do here is become more alert, but not to the point where we kind of lump everybody into only certain categories and say, well, because this person has risk factors A, B, and C, that means that they are at greater risk of suicide. I want to underscore, and I will say this more than once, that everyone is at risk of suicide, regardless of what risk and protective factors they have. Now, these are just some polls I'm going to slip through here just about comfort in discussing suicide in general and with clients. And I want to start off kind of our material by talking about language. Language, as we know, is incredibly important in our culture. And when it comes to areas of equity, social justice, the reduction of bias and stigma. So there is language and newer developments in the language of suicidality. I'll be referring to this by suiciding, dying by suicide, or killing yourself, okay? And I'll also be differentiating between suicide thoughts and suicidal. Okay, the message is that we will use these, I'll use these terms, but I'm even sometimes still working on transitioning my own language after several years of being in this work. I think we're all a work in progress in changing terminology related to suicide. This really holds implications for how clients discuss suicide as well, because again, the goal is to reduce shame and stigma. So, you know, what do we hear the most when it comes to suicide? We hear the term commit suicide. There's a problem with this language because what do we commit? We commit crimes, we commit sins, we are committed, old language, committed to a mental hospital. So we're trying to remove words that have this pejorative context or a way of blaming that person. We also want to speak to accuracy. When we say suicide gesture, for example, or suicidal or suicide thoughts, these are really up to interpretation. A client that sits in a car with a loaded gun for 45 minutes and then calls to ask for help is much more useful information, I should say, than just saying that they're suicidal, okay? So even that word suicidal leaves much up to interpretation. This could have a lot of different meanings. So I really encourage you to think about your own language when it comes to suicide. Try and eliminate or decrease that use of the word commit in front of it. And, kind of challenge some of your own values, beliefs around suicide, because we all have them and they impact the way that we show up for clients who are going through suicide thoughts. So one of the kind of acronyms that we use frequently in the field is path warm, which is an acronym. So these are what we look at when it comes to potential risk factors. So ideation, is there some kind of an expressed or communicated ideation? And this could come in a variety of ways: writing about death, talking about it, looking for ways, or rehearsal. But again, ideation does not always lead to an act. And I want to make that really clear, because research tells us that there are way more people that have thoughts of suicide than who act on them. Okay. S is substance use. So sometimes, again, not all times, but sometimes increased substance use can indicate a risk factor when it comes to suicide thoughts. Purposelessness is one that I've seen quite frequently, feeling like there's no kind of sense in being here, no reason for living. Increased anxiety, agitation, trouble sleeping, trouble focusing, feeling trapped, like there's no way out. A lot of the times, somebody who is having some intense thoughts about suicide will experience what we call kind of a cognitive constriction. So it's almost as if if you think of those poor horses that have, are leading the carriages in a city, and they have kind of blinders on so they see straight ahead on either side of their eyes. And that's kind of this metaphor for when we think about suicide, because people are thinking, okay, living is so painful, and all I'm thinking to do is to try and get out of this pain where I feel trapped. The only thing I can think of is to not live anymore, because the pain won't be there. And so all of that in between, that continuum along the binary, is kind of forgotten about. Hopelessness, which often can be associated with purposelessness. They can go hand in hand sometimes. Withdrawing. So taking a step back significantly from doing things with friends, family, community oriented events, hobbies, etc. Anger. Now, again, I want to underscore that these are not kind of tried and true. All of these things have to be present. And if all of these things are present, that does not necessarily mean somebody's thinking about suicide. But sometimes anger can play a factor, and recklessness as well. So doing things that where they're engaging in risky activities, sometimes impulsively, and then a mood change. And that mood change can go any direction, really. If somebody is typically introverted and they start being more outgoing, which sometimes we would just say, oh, that person's in a better mood, or they're trying out being more outgoing. It doesn't always mean that somebody becomes more withdrawn. Okay. So I want to introduce a curriculum called Safe Talk. Safe Talk is one of the world's leading curricula in suicide intervention, and it's given by Living Works Education, which is a Canada-based company. I am a trainer for Safe Talk, and so I use some of the tenets in these more general trainings. Essentially, that last part around talk is both the idea that we want to talk openly and honestly about suicide in our communities, but it's also an acronym for tell, ask, listen, and keep safe. Okay. So when we think about a tell, it's almost like poker. Like, what are the tells that somebody, or the invitations that somebody's giving off, that make you, as an alert helper, aware of the fact that it could be a possibility? And then there's the ask, which again, we have often a lot of anxiety around. And then we listen. This is the time where, again, we really listen actively and don't just jump into planning. In my own graduate work, this is something that I was taught, and this happens in different ways, I think, still in our field, is that we jump straight into this place of assessment and safety planning before we get to hear the story. But the story is really the most important part of allowing people to have their voice and narrative be heard. And then keeping safe for now. Again, this isn't about saving someone for the rest of their lives. This is not our responsibility as a clinician, as a friend, as a family member, a colleague who's an alert helper. Whenever we're engaging in suicide awareness and intervention, it's never going to be our job for somebody else that they stay alive. But we can help them keep safe for now, which, when we think about making goals, right, with our clients, we think about SMART goals almost. They're achievable, they're measured, they're specific. Oftentimes they're small. So this isn't about keeping safe forever. It's about keeping safe for now, maybe for an hour, maybe for an overnight, maybe for a week. And will help troubleshoot those resources and helping them engage in that. So again, this is another way of looking, is that, is path warm? And you'll see some repeat here. Some of the differences might be kind of the second bullet, when hallucinations might be present. Sometimes there can be delusions or hallucinatory behaviors that come into play, and greater mental health risks that are involved. I'm not going to kind of get into those specifically. I will talk throughout this with the assumption that there's folks that are not in this place where they're necessarily having hallucinations or delusional kind of behavior or beliefs in that moment. Okay. Apathy, again, kind of hinting, dropping these invitations about death. Sometimes giving away possessions is one of those things where we might see people in increased stages of thinking about suicide or planning for suicide. When I say a relationship breakup, really what I'm referring to is loss. Often what you'll hear in folks' narratives around suicide is something around definitely pain, and often loss. And loss could be anything. It could be the dissolution of a relationship. It could be the death of someone. It could be the loss of a job. really any kind of a loss of a piece of their identity in some way. It could be some kind of obtainment of a weapon or an instrument that could be used, such as drugs, to die by suicide. And one of the things that we often don't consider is this idea of somebody who may have had a mood change. Let's say they've become more agitated or more withdrawn, and then there's a really sudden happiness or a sense of calm, as if things really have improved for them, almost a peace that has come over them. And when there are thoughts about suicide and somebody's wrestling with, what should I do? Should I do this? Can I do this? What would that mean? When there has been sort of a decision on their point, think about when you've made a decision finally that's been really difficult. There's a sense of, phew, I have made the decision. That part has been done. So there's a sense of relief almost. And then here are some protective factors. Again, I want to highlight that just because these exist for somebody does not mean that a person might not die by suicide. Okay, this reduces the likelihood, research tells us. If they have care for whatever their presenting issues are, if it's mental health or substance use or physical health, if they have access to effective treatment methods. Everyone who thinks about suicide, folks, does not have to be depressed. Okay, so everyone that thinks about suicide does not have to be depressed. They have an engagement and an investment for treatment. They're motivated to be engaged. And this is part of one of how I often measure somebody's ability to collaborate with me in keeping safe for now, is if they can say, I am engaged in my own well-being and safety. That's a great kind of note to me that they're ready to work on life. Okay. That they have supports in their relationships, coping skills, beliefs in their own self-efficacy. They have social contacts and support networks. This one is enormous. And so when we do safety planning with clients, or again, anybody who we might come in contact with that we can help as an alert helper and intervene, helping them plan for their connections to life through support is one of the big things we'll focus on. That they have conflict resolution, family connections, and I define family broadly here. That could be given family, chosen family, community family. Sometimes that there are cultural and religious beliefs that discourage suicide. Now, this I've seen go both ways. Some religious or spiritual or cultural beliefs, there is a lot of shame or stigma around suicide, and this can increase feelings of shame if somebody's thinking about it. And on the other side of that, sometimes that sort of fear or that investment in their faith or spirituality or cultural value can help them be safe. Okay, so that really needs to be determined for each individual person. That they have access to healthcare and mental health care. That their means of suicide, whether that's a weapon or drugs or whatever the case is, that there's restricted access to that, and that there is social and community support. Okay, so let's talk about this question because I hear it a lot. And I have asked it, and maybe some of you have asked it too. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? I want you to just pause for a moment and think, why might this question be problematic? Hint, hint. When we're talking about suicide, it is problematic. Why do you think this could be? So let's talk about why that could be. Are you thinking about hurting yourself is a different question. then are you thinking about killing yourself? For a few reasons, okay? The first one is that, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to this cognitive constriction of living or dying, living equals pain, dying equals the absence of that terrible pain. So when someone says, are you thinking about hurting yourself? If I am thinking about killing myself, I might say, no, I'm not thinking about hurting myself. I'm thinking about not feeling pain ever again. Okay. So that's not an accurate question. The other point is that there are lots of people in the world that self-harm, and they do it with absolutely no desire to kill themselves at all, ever. And in fact, lots of people, I know we might not think of this as the most adaptive way to cope, but self-harm, regardless of how we wish to see it, is a way of coping. Again, it might not be the healthiest, but there are folks that, as responsibly as they can in a harm reduced way, do self-harm and take care of themselves afterwards in terms of wound care, mental health care. And again, there's an absence of lethality. There's no desire to die. So when we ask the question, we want to be direct. And we also want to listen to our intuition. If somebody says no, being patient and staying with that person and seeing when the next available time is that we can voice our concerns, give some evidence for why we feel this way, and see if we can broach that question again. So we want to notice somebody's body language, their nonverbals. We want to be comfortable and unhurried. And often we are the ones that need to bring up the topic of suicide, the possibility that suicide's in the room. Now, why do we want to do this? Okay, it's because there are good reasons that people would be resistant to talking about suicide with anybody, even somebody they trust. If you're in a situation where you're the counselor, then you might have clients that are super resistant to this because they worry about what might happen to them. Does that mean you're going to call the cops? Are you going to call my spouse, my parents? Are you going to institutionalize me? Right? Like these are grave concerns. Somebody who's a client or another person in your life, a friend, a family member, they might worry about how you see them, that they might be perceived as weak or that they're letting you down. Okay. So often we need to be the courageous ones to ask about this first. And we want to couch language in observations that we gain from invitations. And remember, invitations are the tells that we pick up from people. So it might look like this. You know, friend, sometimes when people are missing work, they're worrying about things and withdrawing from friends, the things that they love to do, they're thinking about suicide. Is that something that you're thinking about? So it's almost like an introductory paragraph, right? When you write a research paper or a position paper, you have this first paragraph that introduces your hypothesis and the question, right, of testing that hypothesis. This is essentially what you're doing here. You're giving reasons to why you think this hypothesis might be true. So this is what asking the question could look like. And it depends on your style, maybe your relationship with the client's presentation and personality. Are you thinking about suicide? Is suicide on your mind? I'm wondering if you're thinking about killing yourself. Are you thinking about ending it all? About suicide? Does it feel like life is not worth living? And then if somebody says, yeah, kinda, you might say something like, okay, so we might be talking about suicide, right? You could also say something like, sometimes when people feel this bad, it's really not unusual to think, you know, I'd rather be dead, or I'd rather not be here than have to deal with this. Has that come up for you? And you can also say, You told me you were highly opposed to suicide. Maybe this has to do with faith or cultural values, but I'm wondering, with all those immense stressors you've had recently, did you have some thoughts of suicide? Maybe even if they were just fleeting, they came and left. Okay. So here's the good news about asking this question directly, because sometimes there's this myth that I have to say is really deeply ingrained in our in many cultures. I think certainly in American culture, is the idea that even if we know a lot of information around suicide, there might be this thought in the back of our head that we will give somebody the idea. Um, we won't give somebody the idea. That really is a myth. Another myth is that if we ask, we're going to be we're going to be kind of breaking a relationship in some way, that a person will find offense to that. I can tell you that in my 17 years of practice, I have only had one person get sort of taken aback to the point of mildly angry at me asking that question. And it was not a client, it was a friend. And it was not something that couldn't be overcome. Because here's what happens more when you ask the question, then the answer is no. Somebody thinks to themselves, wow, okay, that's big. But you know what? Liz can handle it. Like, you've got the chutzpah to be able to talk about that subject with somebody. So if that person at that time might just be going through a really crappy period in their life, and maybe later down the line, they do have thoughts about suicide, you might be the person that they decide to come to because you were the one to originally broach it with them. And they know that you have the comfort and the confidence to be able to sit with them and having that discussion. And that's a huge deal. This is another way that we kind of get this aspect of community care out there. So suicide intervention and collaborative care isn't just a one-time deal, but that it's something that can support people throughout a lifetime. And now that you've asked the question, even if the answer is no, they might want to say, no, I'm not, but here's what's going on. And if they say yes, I like to refer to that as the oh shit moment. And lots of us have the oh shit moment. I still have the oh shit moment. And I ask about suicide a lot with clients. I ask about it so much that my clients sometimes even can broach that topic now before I do, which I really love, because it means it's becoming part of their verbiage and vernacular, and they can talk about it openly. So if they tell me about a really bad day and I open my mouth to ask, they might say, I know what you're going to ask, Liz. Are you thinking about suicide? No, I'm not thinking about suicide. I've just had a really, really shitty day. And I really wish I did better on that test. Okay, cool. But really what it's time to do now is listen. And this is one of the hardest things because we want to jump in to trying to make things better, trying to fix things. And so we're actually doing a lot on our end by listening and not jumping in. So in order to not jump in, right, this is what we're trying to avoid. We don't want to change, make light of what, sorry, that's a binary slide, not he or she, but what they're thinking. We don't want to criticize or minimize the potential for harm. We don't want to explain away what they're thinking or feeling. We don't want to pass judgments. We don't want to give advice. We also don't want to agree to secrecy. And this is pretty important. So I always say, what I can promise somebody is that I will be absolutely dedicated to walking through this with them and getting the support that they need. I will be discretionary with what they tell me. That is, I might not reveal things that I don't need to reveal if additional resources need to be brought into the mix. And I will be committed to being there with them and helping them find whatever connections or networks that are needed to be helpful, which are all different than secrecy. So again, less helpful things here are being judgmental, being angry. So sometimes when we hear somebody say this, we will get a response of, wow, why would you even think of that? That's stupid. That's crazy. I can't believe you would be so selfish. What I think sometimes, again, is one of those ingrained beliefs is that suicide is selfish. And of the many, 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 many people I have talked to that have had thoughts of suicide, what has come up is that dying by suicide for them feels like the least selfish option, because they feel like a burden to those in their life, and that removing themselves would be less burdensome. Being panicked. Being panicked is another one. It is natural for us to feel panic when we are talking to somebody about life and death. We also want to do our very best to kind of maintain composure and calmness, because we can help give that to the other person too, right? There's a mirror neuron thing happening there. And so we want to be as composed as we can be, but we can also give voice to the fact of, like, I won't lie, talking about this, certainly I feel worried. Absolutely, I'm worried right now. Because that has a way of connecting you and that other person and making it known that you care about their well-being. And impatient. Sometimes this is hard because our lives do not allow us to spend endless amounts of time doing an intervention with somebody. But we want to do our best to be really present. I also want to, when we think about asking that question, and I'm going to go back a few slides as this is on my mind, to asking the question, be mindful of the way that you ask, because we can inadvertently create circumstances because we are fearful. And we can have these demand questions. So we're demanding a particular kind of answer. So one way of saying that would be, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Okay, now if somebody asks me that, I clearly know the answer that they want to hear, which is, no, I'm not. That question shows me that the person who has asked it does not want to hear me and is not comfortable hearing a truthful yes from me. So we want to be clear and direct and without our own values. It doesn't mean that we can't have values around suicide, but it means that we really want to temper those values. Okay, let's talk about ambivalence. Ambivalence, when it comes to suicide work, is a good thing. So when we hear somebody say, I just don't know, if only I could figure this out. I don't know how to do that. I can't do that yet. There are words that come up for this that say, I'm not quite sure. And if somebody's not quite sure, it means that there's still some hope of wanting to live. It means they're not certain about the decision to die. If only I could figure this out. Well, what do you think would need to happen in order to help figure this out? I can't do that yet. I wonder what could be helpful to help you take that next step in doing that. So we want to use these statements. This results in us being really strong, discerning listeners. But listening for that, what I'll refer to as a life voice, to be able then bridge that in maybe staying safe for now. So here are another few examples. I would not do that if, or I would do that if. That if is a big one. Listen for them as they're talking about strengths, supports, and resources. What are they looking forward to? What's on their agenda? Really, what it is that we're listening for is we're listening for hope. And ambivalence is hope, but these other things are also hope. So if I can give you an example, I was meeting with a client years ago in a college counseling setting, and they had some pretty moderate to high thoughts about suicide and doing a little bit of planning around it. And one of the things that had come up, they were an astronomy major, and they said, there's going to be, I'm going to get this wrong because it's probably something about like a lunar, there was an eclipse, or there was something happening that would be visible with the moon in 2 days. And so they said, I am kind of looking forward to that eclipse or whatever it was. I said, okay, so that happens in 2 days, right? Does it feel like you might be able to keep yourself safe in order to see that really important historical scientific event? And that was one of the things that we use to help keep safe for now, was looking forward to that event. And this goes back to, again, it's not about keeping anybody safe, number one, solely on your shoulders. That should never occur. But it is those small increments of keeping safe for now or the immediate future. So when we listen to their narrative, okay, this is what we're doing right now. We're listening to how they got to this place of suicide. And we might ask them, as we start to hear some hope, how does the future look? What things might make you want to go on living? What do you think would make you feel more or less hopeful about the future? And this is how we can specifically link. This first one's about ambivalence. So if somebody says, I just don't know, I might say, as a counselor or a friend, an alert helper in this situation, it sounds like you're uncertain. I wonder if we can try and figure that part out first and go from there. I don't know if I can do it yet. Okay, so you don't know if you can do it yet. What do you think would help move you towards being able to do in the future? So if they said, I don't know if I can talk to my partner about this yet. Okay, what do you think would help move you towards doing that? Well, there is this thing. Yeah, so it sounds like there's something that you're looking forward to. Maybe they're talking about a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, a pet. And as active listeners, we use those basic counseling skills and say, I see a change in you when you start to talk about your dog or your grand kitty. They really mean a lot to you. Seeing that eclipse really means a lot to you. Okay. So I'm going to give you my cheat for when I hear the yes answer. Okay. So you ask the question, let's back up. So you are listening for those tells, those invitations, and you use those invitations to ask the question. So I'm hearing you say things like, you are more worried than usual. It's been really difficult to go to work. Your sleep has been really off lately, and you've been withdrawing from friends and things that make you happy. I'm wondering if you're thinking about suicide. And then they say yes. And then we have the very, very clinical term of the oh shit moment. And then it comes time for our place to listen. Now, what I like, and you can take my transitional statement, but what I like to say is, okay, so we're talking about suicide. Tell me a little bit about how you got to this place of suicide. That to me has always served to be a really nice transition to listening to the story and listening for the life voice as much as we can, so that when we hear that life voice, we can try and then link that to the next phase, which is helping them to move towards hope and safety. Now, I want to touch on motivational interviewing. as a modality that works really well when we're talking to folks that might have thoughts of suicide, because again, it explores this idea of ambivalence really nicely. And we're not being combative in any way. We're trying to maintain collaboration and working with the client where they are. Okay. So, there's a lot of, sounds like you feel really overwhelmed. No wonder you're in this place of questioning kind of where you are in the world. And a lot of, okay, what I hear you say is, right? So that's reflection, that's summarizing, that's making sure that folks know that they're seen and heard. There are also a lot of implications in neuroscience when it comes to how we create presence in a therapeutic alliance. Okay. So this comes to checking our own assumptions. And I really like this bottom left. Only if we're prepared to listen, we can join them in their individual narratives of this extreme experience of pain. And really only in that can then we become influential in help changing the course and reestablishing life goals, life-oriented goals, that life voice. And what we know is that by having that presence and that empathic relationship, that helps to actually change people's physiological states of how they're experiencing being in that moment. There's actually changes in the brain circuitry, getting them out of fight or flight and getting them into a social engagement place. And again, in this bottom purple, bottom right, one of the greatest lessons is taking the time to pay attention and listen, because remember, mirror neurons, that mirroring neurobiology of our brains is one of the best ways we can help somebody be calm and centered, is to center ourselves first. And we want people to be in a position where they are calm and centered when they're thinking about decisions like this that are so huge. Okay, now, when we listen to somebody's narrative about suicide, at some point, if we're in a clinical setting, we want to get to this juncture where we do start to assess for suicide. It's not the first thing we want to do, folks. We want to listen. But as clinicians, as counselors, we also, especially if this is in a clinical setting with our clients, we want to be able to assess. And, with desire to suicide, there is typically one or more of these following characteristics: no reason to live, a wish to die, a wish not to carry on, a passive suicide ideation, not caring if death occurs. So it's not active, but it's passive. Like if I was driving and I got into an accident, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And a desire to make an attempt. Okay. So if you get that yes answer and you're listening for the life voice, you're listening for maybe risk factors that are involved, you might want to ask questions kind of on the end of that, or sprinkled throughout. Okay, so in thinking about this, what do you think that you might do? And sometimes harm might be involved. Okay, I know I said before this sense of harming or killing yourself. Let's maybe just take harming away for purposes of this training. So let's take the harm away in this and just stick with killing yourself. What would you do? Have you made a specific plan to kill yourself? What does that plan include? Are those means lethal, and are they available to you? And have there been any preparations? So that comes in the form of rehearsal, writing a note, making a will, giving away things or making arrangements for monies or other things in your life that you have possession of. Rehearsing the plan. And think about some of these basic skills or advanced skills that we have, which are something like a scaling question. We can absolutely use these. So, okay. So if you rate your intent to kill yourself right now, how you're feeling right now on a scale from 1 to 10. And make sure to define that scale. As always, with every scaling question, we want to define that scale. So let's say 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. 0, I don't want to kill myself at all. 10, I've never wanted to kill myself more than how I feel right now. Okay, so today you're rating yourself an intention of a 5. And the last time we met, you rated your intent at 7. What do you think changed? Okay, so these increments are really important. And when you work with somebody in an ongoing way who has the presence of suicide thoughts, every single session, you want to touch base on these. And so scaling questions are a nice way to do that. There are inventories as well that are brief that you can use. But this is a nice way to keep track of those from a session to session basis. Non-suicide contracts are not used, okay? Instead, we are planning for safety. Because safety planning is something that is collaborative. A contract can create more shame and guilt and responsibility to another person, and somebody's already dealing with a lot that they've already got going on without that feeling of shame, which usually doesn't make people feel more hopeful. Okay, so if they can't follow through with something, and this goes for the same with a no harm contract, if you are working with somebody who only was self-harming as a coping mechanism, we also don't want to do self-harm contracts either. Okay, we really want to give people this sense of autonomy and collaboration. So a safety plan might look like, okay, when I'm upset and thinking about suicide, I'll take the following steps. I'll use what I've learned in therapy to identify what's upsetting me. I'll do these following things that we've identified make me feel better: contact my best friend, take a walk, do this breathing technique. I'll write in my journal. If they get really specific, I'll call my therapist or a suicide hotline. So you want to really kind of look at this as a gradient, right? Because thoughts of suicide are different than planning for suicide. And if I feel like I can't control my suicide behavior, thoughts, preparation, I'll go to the emergency room or call 911. And remember flagging the minefields. What barriers are there to those things, to engaging in safety? So we want to ask, like in the past, what's been helpful? If this situation has come up, what's been helpful for you in the past? And what is a barrier for you to engage in that thing that's been helpful in the past? We absolutely want to troubleshoot these things with our client, or again, we might be doing this with a friend or family member. I'm talking about this largely from a sense of a clinical relationship. And so then we come to this keep safe connection. So when we're doing a safety plan, or when we're helping somebody to keep safe for now, those keep safe connections are supports, and they want to follow the 3 A's: available, approachable, and able. So they're there when they need it. They are approachable so that the person having thoughts feels as though that support or resource is going to be available and accepting of them. And able, so they actually can have the capacity to increase safety for somebody. So one of the things that I will do with clients is I might rehearse part of the plan in calling the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline. We might do that right in my office. And one of the things that I know about them is they are all these 3 A's: available, approachable, and able. So if it's 3 a.m. and one of your keep safe connections is your best friend, they might not answer at 3 a.m., right? So we want to troubleshoot things throughout the continuum of time and circumstances that will be available to your client. The National Suicide and Crisis Hotline, they have, as part of their training guidebook, they have to pick up the phone in 3 or less rings. And every time I have called with a client, that indeed happens. That is part of their policy and procedure manual. And they're 24/7, so they're available, approachable, and able. Just some things to remember when we talk about suicide, especially from the perspective of being a counselor. You're not responsible for solving somebody else's problems. If they have a problem that has led them to having thoughts about suicide, it's not about either making sure that they live or solving that problem for them. We give our clients autonomy. We see them as the experts of their lives. So we're there to walk with them and to collaborate with them. We can't promise secrecy. Ethically, that's not something that we can promise. Okay. If somebody's at the point where they are not able to keep themselves safe, or our intuition says that they can't keep themselves safe, we can't be the treatment plan. We can't be the treatment center. There are some things in that show Intervention that are really not accurate and are outside the scope of best practices, I will admit. But one of the things that we hear, I believe it is Jeff Van Vonderen saying quite a bit, it's one of his catchphrases throughout Intervention, is, up until now, you've been the treatment center and you suck. Might not be the best way to say it, but you get the gist, right? We can't be the treatment plan or the treatment center solely. So we shouldn't be managing this alone, and you're not responsible if a client suicides. In my own career, I have had several clients die by suicide, and it has been a really difficult thing to go through, right? This is somebody that I've cared about, that I work with, that I know this has been a problem. And in one case, I was not alert to the possibility, which almost may have been a little bit harder. And so what's really important about that is that we have our own resources and networks to be able to consult with for support in processing this kind of a loss, because it's a loss for us. Okay. Now, one of the things that we see a lot of in the field is that we can often dismiss, or avoid the possibility of suicide. Okay, so I want to dive into this a little bit more. So when we miss the possibility of suicide, it means we kind of don't connect with the fact that it's a possibility. And I'll give you an example of this. When I had been practicing in the field for 10 years or so, and I was doing suicide interventions with clients pretty regularly, I had a very close friend that was giving off invitations, and I missed them completely because I was outside of the role as counselor. And it was like wearing a counselor hat and a friend hat. And because it was a friend, I really missed it. And I got to the point, I was talking about it with another friend one day, about being worried for them. And it was only then that I realized, like, whoa, this could be real. And so I did ask my friend eventually if they were having thoughts of suicide, which they were. But I had missed it for quite a long time just because of, it wasn't in the box. We also dismiss the possibility of suicide because we might think that it's not very serious, that wouldn't happen to that person. Oh, they have everything going on in their life. They've got lots of supports. They don't fit the mold. So we dismiss it. Another thing that I hear sometimes is people saying, well, they're doing this for attention. Here's the thing about that. People who are giving off invitations that suicide is a possibility for attention can still die by suicide. So we want to take things seriously, no matter where they're coming from, who they're coming from. We also might dismiss it because we think that people have to act hugely as a departure from the way that they normally act. And that's not the case. Everybody is going to be really, really different. And that's one of the reasons that's so important not to pigeonhole people into, these are the folks at risk and these are folks that are safe. Anybody could be at risk of suicide at any point in their lives. We also avoid the possibility of suicide. And often it's because we don't know what to do, right? Because if we ask that question about suicide and somebody says yes, and then we have that oh shit moment, we might just stay in the oh shit moment. Oh boy, what do we do now? So we don't know how to help. We might be too scared to help. We might worry that we give somebody the idea. We don't want the responsibility because certainly, I won't lie to you, when we ask that question and we hear yes, we become part of that system in the moment. We become part of how to collaborate with that person in that place of pain with them in the moment. So, is there some responsibility that goes into it? Yes. Again, it's not entirely on you. It can't be. It's on that person. It's their responsibility. It's their life. They're the only ones that make decisions about it. We also avoid suicide because, hello, we have stuff going on in our own lives. We might have our own thoughts of suicide on a kind of a deeper end, or we might just be in a place of our life where we're feeling fatigued, burned out, overwhelmed, pressed for time. And so it makes it almost an extra burden to be that collaborative carer for somebody in that moment. So some rules of thumb when it comes to suicide intervention. We want to take all threats of suicide seriously. Again, no matter where they're coming from. When in doubt, always consult. This will differ depending on where you're working. A school setting, for instance, with minors is really different when it comes to suicide than, let's say, a college counseling center or a community mental health agency. So think about the information that you need to know when you consult with people that will help give them the information to best be able to support you. Think of those really reasonable questions like, can I leave a client in a room alone to consult? Or is there some almost like a code that you can use when you call from the room? And what if you get a phone call from a client who's at risk? You're not sitting with them in that moment. So these are questions that where you're working, they might have ways to address these situations. So you really want to know what your workplace policy is around this. And regardless of those policies, you want to have folks you can consult with, a supervisor, colleague, supervision group, whatever. And again, I want to highlight not to be afraid to ask directly and honestly about suicide. This is not encouraging suicide. You are not giving somebody the idea. Suicide is one of these things in our culture right now that is really prevalent. So it's almost impossible for somebody to not see this as a reality in our world. Okay. You're not going to give somebody the idea because you have asked about it in a way that shows that you can be a confidant. We always want to practice, again, that active listening, reflecting about what you're seeing and how they're feeling. And we also want to take part in that assessment and screening. And we do those just with those kind of investigatory, kind, gently exploratory questions. Tell me more about that. Help me understand that a little bit more. I'm wondering about, and again, always processing. So that was a lot to tell me. What was that like to tell me? And we want to be able to look at both risk factors and protective factors. Again, not in a way that boxes somebody in, but in a way that we can help with our own assessment of where a client is, and we can help a client sometimes see that there might be some life forces that they were unaware of, again, because they're in this place of constriction, of really just focusing in on the pain and why life is really painful. We all know this, right? When we do that, we focus on what's really negative and hurtful, it's very difficult to see some of the good that we have. We want to allow for silence. We want to avoid pep talks. Now, come on, you know you don't want to do this. This is silly. Life is worth living. You've got more to offer. We really want to avoid those things. They're not helpful. One of the things that I've recently seen on a streaming site is, I believe they're advertisements for BetterHelp, an online counseling service. And somebody says, you know, why reach out for help when other people are so, when other people give such beneficial advice? And it's some of those statements like, it's just a phase, you'll get past it. Buck up, look at the positive side, you know, and it's kind of this, it's this kind of like joking way of saying that's not really helpful, because it's not, right? So this get through it mentality is really starting to be actively confronted. Understand, anticipate that you might feel overwhelmed with somebody who's having thoughts of suicide. That's completely understandable. And if you're at all concerned for somebody's safety, you always seek supervision. So again, make sure you know what your policy at your place of work is and consult like it's nobody's business. And here are some resources. Again, there's a 1-800-SUICIDE number, 1-800-273-TALK. And then here are some websites that are helpful in terms of both resources for you and for clients. The Trevor Project is a site and set of resources specifically for LGBTQIA+ folks, because historically, sometimes folks who are in this identity are not necessarily feeling supported by other resources around suicide, and because of ongoing microaggressions, microassaults, bias, heteronormativity, homophobia, transphobia. These are populations that have very specific and unique needs when it comes to suicide prevention. And then here are some other resources that can help you expand your skills, as well as resources for your clients. Now, if I'm talking specifically about you expanding your own knowledge and confidence in this work, there are 2 workshops that I would strongly recommend. And I also want to be very transparent and say that I'm actually a trainer in both of these. That does not mean I'm asking you to do a training with me. That's not something I have scheduled or anything like that. But I want to be transparent in that I'm sort of a stakeholder in that way with these 2 curricula, Assist and Safe Talk. Both of them are through Living Works Education and they do trainings all over the world to help people, not just counselors, anybody 16 or older, to become alert caregivers is what we would call them. So this first one, Assist, is a 2-day workshop and is really unique because it's a small group of trainees and you become very close with them because you talk about your own experiences and relationships to suicide. That might not be you as an individual, but all of us have a relationship to suicide. We know somebody who has died by suicide. We've had thoughts ourselves. We've talked to other people in our lives that have thoughts of suicide. There are famous people that we love, admire, follow, who have died by suicide. And so it affects all of us. And we really talk about how those values and sometimes biases impact the way we think about it, because it will ultimately impact how we sit across from somebody and talk about this and help intervene. Safe Talk is a shorter version of, not really Assist, not a shorter version of Assist, but it's about a 3-hour workshop and is more of a primer to some of the deeper work that one might get into at Assist. And so if you're interested in finding one of these trainings, I believe that right now they are only offered in person. So depending on your own level of comfort and safety. But if you go to the livingworks.net site, you can go to find a training and look for an Assist or a Safe Talk training in a place that you can get to it and see who's offering. So here we are. I want you to think about how this information lands on you. This is not a one and done deal. There are continuing to be improvements and really good research that's being done in this field. And so the work that we do with suicide is ongoing. It's like a living document. And so are our values and beliefs around it. And so, think about where you see yourself in this process of collaboratively helping somebody. And, I want to kind of say, and I may have said this before, but just kind of hearing a minimal expression of having thoughts about suicide, if that causes us to have somebody placed into a hospital or recommend or do that in a way that is non-voluntary for the client, that often does not, research shows, that does not put that client in the safest space. Being in the hospital, especially again, when it's not an imminent threat, can be really disheartening, disparaging, scary, and make that person definitely feel like the trust is not there. Okay. So we really want to think critically about not doing things just out of fear on our end, but balancing what our own ethical responsibilities are, our responsibilities to our agency that we're working for, and our responsibility to our clients to work within the best practices of collaborative care in their safety. Okay. So please think about questions around this. Think about your own verbiage in using kind of how you ask that question about suicide, sticking with language that is inclusive, that is specific. And please reach out if there are things that come up. And again, as I said in the beginning, if there is kind of material around this that creates some a lack of safety for you, reach out to your contacts, your support network, and resources to best keep yourself safe and healthy. Okay. I really appreciate everyone listening to this and look forward to some more discussion. Thanks, everyone.